want to give a quick intro. This panel is on abolishing police and abolishing ICE, the abolitionist perspective on open borders. And we're going to be led off by Ash as our moderator. And then from there, Karma Chavez will also be speaking. And also in terms of Karma, there's a book that she recently wrote that actually Bamby Salcedo, who's also on this panel, is a part of, among others, called Queer and Trans Migrations. And that is something that's also up on our auction right now, if you would like. They donated a copy of it. And then also we'll go on to Abraham Paulous from Baji. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Oh, and I mentioned Bamby, but Bamby Salcedo is from the Trans Latina Coalition. She is the president and CEO. So great. Thank you all so much for your time right now. And just remember that if this happens, that's what's occurring. And if you also would prefer to not speak in English, that's not a problem. Just go ahead. Thank you so much. Go for it, Ash.
All right. So all the viewers, thank you for joining us. So I just want to go straight into this, into my questions, so we have enough time for Q&A at the end. And this is really just a good way for the panelists to introduce themselves. Basically, I want to know how you all became border abolitionists. What did you guys read?
So thank you, Ash. Thank you also, Jamila, for the invitation, and Steve for helping us to get everything organized the other day, and for all the support of making this event happen. I'm really excited to be a part of it. I guess for me, I started doing border justice work kind of as an academic activist in about, I don't know, 2004, something like this, when I lived in the state of Arizona. And I worked with Coalición de Derechos Humanos, which is an anti-border militarization group in Tucson. And so I was there and just kind of got radicalized. And that group and all of us associated with it were always called by the other side, the Open Borders Lobby, the OBL. And at the time, I always thought that was kind of funny until I realized that was, in fact, what we were. And so being in a space that was about immigration and also about indigenous nations and sovereignty really is what brought me into this work. And then years later, as I started to get more involved in trying to support Black liberation efforts, it just seemed like a natural thing to put these two pieces in conversation: prison abolition, border abolition. And so, that's a large part of what the book that Jamila just mentioned is trying to bring those conversations to bear in different ways with gender and sexuality at the center. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Word. All right. So let's go to Abraham next then. Is Abe there? I can't hear Abe.
Abraham, can you? Abe, Abe, I see your face, but I don't hear your voice. Let me see if I can unmute. No? Wait, go ahead, try again. You unmuted and then muted again.
Nope, can't hear a thing.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, if you wanna pop out and come back. Okay,
right,
thanks
cool.
so much, Abe. Thanks so much. Do you want to pass it over to Bamby maybe, Ash?
Yeah, go to Bamby.
Cool, thank you so much.
Bueno, primero que nada, yo quiero honrar mi poder superior, mi creador, por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes, y también quiero, obviamente, darle las gracias a las personas que nos acompañan hoy en día. Well, first and foremost, I always like to acknowledge and thank my creator for giving me the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I also want to acknowledge and honor the beautiful people who are joining us today. My name is Bamby Salcedo, as it was mentioned, and I am a very privileged trans Latina mujer inmigrante who has the privilege to be the president and the CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition. I've been doing community work, or I've been, involved in community liberation for over 20 years. And I got into it because not just my own personal life experiences, but also, once I had the privilege to reform my life, then when I was able to see the world without drugs, I was seeing how my siblings who are trans identified were also, having the same experiences that I did have. And so, for me, understanding the criminality of trans people, and because of our existence, we are criminalized and put in cages. Then it has been sort of like my purpose, really, to find ways for us to empower ourselves and for us to also, get to the liberation that we all talk about, right? But that many of us don't even understand. So, that's what I do. I just, I consider myself a servant to the people, and to me, it's important that I always reminded that of the privilege that I hold as a trans woman, but also use my privilege in order for me to be able to do whatever needs to be done in order to better the quality of life of my peoples.
Word. Did Abraham come back yet? I'm assuming not. I don't see Abraham. But all right, but let's go to the next question in that case, because there are a lot of people who will be all for, like, say, abolishing ICE, but won't be for abolishing the police, basically. And we got to chant, la misma porquería, the same shit, cops and ICE and the Border Patrol. What made you realize that, both these institutions are connected and that both these institutions need to be abolished? What experience did you have? What did you read that made you realize that, the police and la migra are the same shit? So I guess go to Karma first.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to think about the state apparatus kind of in its full complexity and see what the logics are of how these things operate. And so if you look at the way that local police operate in relation to communities of color, it's absolutely resonant with the way that Border Patrol and ICE operate in relation to communities of color. They just sometimes have different targets. And I think it's important to put these two movements in conversation, because one of the things that can happen, particularly within the immigrant justice movement, is people make claims to belonging on the basis that they're not criminal, right? That they're not, doing anything wrong. They just want to be a part of the nation and raise their families and work hard. And unfortunately, that actually participates in anti-Blackness, because what they're trying not to be very often when those are made by non-Black immigrants are Black. And so I think you get the same kind of thing on the other side, where claims to citizenship become the basis for belonging, as in legal citizenship. And so I think the need to put these organizations together, police organizations along with border police organizations, is to show that they perpetuate these divide and conquer logics, and we need to address them both as part of the same apparatus. And so I think that's a lot of what I imagine my work trying to do, is to help people to see how the deep logic by which these seemingly different groups actually operate and who they target, and the way that those targeted groups are very similar in significant ways.
Bamby, yeah, I'm gonna hear from you, Bamby. What made you realize that the police and ICE and the Border Patrol, this is all the same shit, basically, and they all need to be abolished?
Yeah, well, thank you. I know that Abraham just got in. I don't know if you want to give him an opportunity.
Oh, yeah, word. Can you? Yes, we can hear you. Okay, cool. Abraham.
Bamby, thank you so much for not leaving me in the dust. But I'm gonna let you finish. I'm not gonna cut you, Bamby. You can finish and then.
Yeah, either one of you guys, and I'll reframe the question for Abraham to like include the last question as well.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. I mean, you were already talking, so. But anyways, that's all good. I mean, I think the truth is that, how the system is set up, as Karma was saying, obviously, is specifically to really cage our peoples, right? And not just that, but also making money off people, right? And so both ICE and the police, or the criminal and justice system, right? It like really functions the same way. And it really is the privatization of both, right? That really has led to cage people, while at the same time make money off them, right? And so for me, as a trans woman, right, like I said, who was really involved in the street economy for, the vast majority of my life, like I didn't see those things, right? Like I didn't make those connections. I didn't see that. I was just really in survival mode. But it was, again, until I was able to have more clarity without drugs, without, prison and all of those things, right? I thought I was getting arrested and being put in immigration detention because of the things that I was doing, right? Like not really understanding that what I was doing, I was doing to survive, and that I was put in that position because of the structures that we have within our society, right? And that happens to many of our peoples, right? We think that, like for me in my case, right, because I had to do sex work as means to survive, because I had to consume drugs in order for me to, not see my reality, right? And because I was put in that position as a trans woman without the opportunity to have access to the things that I needed in order for me to survive, then, I was arrested. And because I am not from this country, although this is a stolen land, right? I, you know, I was put in immigration detention and deported, multiple times. And so, again, for me, like, and for many of our peoples, that's the truth, right? Like, we don't understand how these complexities and the systems really are set up to continue to marginalize us, to continue to oppress us. But now that I have the privilege to learn and to really combat these institutions, right, that that have been designed really to keep us in the margins, to keep us oppressed, and understanding that, one and the other one is the same, right? And so I think what needs to happen really is to continue to uplift our community power, right? And really empower our peoples, for all of us to understand, because even some of, our peoples, right, like in the Latinx community, and even, and in the Black and Indigenous communities, right, they are for the police, right? They are for the ICE machine, right? And but they don't know, like, that these institutions have been created for, for us to continue to be, oppressed and marginalized. So for me, it's just, doing that, right? Like, I think we as an organization are doing a lot of incredible work really empowered in our community. In fact, that's how we as an organization started, right? Because in 2009, when we started, although there were two prominent and, trans-led national organizations that were doing incredible work, but they were not including the needs and issues of trans Latina immigrant women, right? And so that's how our organization was born. And through that, understanding that our trans sisters are in immigration detention, oftentimes with no family to support them, and often in most times than not, right, like left, anything and everything that they knew in their countries to come to this country to in some ways try to find the American way, only to really find the American nightmare, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for us, it has been that, right? Supporting our sisters who are inside immigration detention, supporting them to when they get out, but also supporting our trans siblings who are also in prisons, so, and that is also like a direct link to my own personal experiences, and that's why to me it's super important that we participate in changing these structures or really eliminating these structures.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Abe, I want to give you a chance to also like introduce yourself really quickly. So basically, I want you to talk about what made you realize borders are bullshit. First of all, what did you experience? What did you read to make you realize that we should abolish borders? And also, what made you realize that the borders, the authorities who enforce borders, the ICE, the Border Patrol, they're the same shit as the cops, and they also need to be abolished. So yeah, go ahead, explain that, Abe.
Okay, I'm just gonna assume you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you. Again, apologies to all the participants. Thank you, Jamila, and the whole organizing crew to have me on here. So I guess I'll take both your questions all at the same time. I am a non-citizen who's had contact with the criminal legal system. I actually am a refugee. I came from a war in Africa between Eritrea and Ethiopia that was essentially just about the border. And as a refugee coming from one war, I came into another war in the United States during the 80s and 90s. The US government calls it the war on drugs. And I think growing up in those conditions, we had always felt like the police were not a part of our community or were not bringing anything positive to our community. And I come from a neighborhood in which the term fuck the police was essentially our energy, right? I know now it's fuck 12. I think that's the 2020 version.
Yeah.
Either way, this was really about us being able to feel as if we could walk around in our community and still be together as a family, right? And I think that there were policies and laws that were passed in the 90s, war on drugs, war on poverty, and the war on immigration. I only started discovering that after I had a couple of incidents with law enforcement. And one, I ended up in Rikers Island. And I really want to give Bamby a shout out for describing feelings and emotion, because it was in Rikers Island that I think that me being locked up with Black and brown bodies, right, that there can be a sense of self-hate, a sense of I am individually responsible to be in this cage. I am individually responsible for not becoming a citizen or having a green card or being threatened to get deported, right? And I think my path to abolition was not just one around liberating my mind, but also liberating my emotions and my heart and getting to a point where I felt myself as being a human being, because these cages and these borders basically destroy that, right? They destroy our sense of time and space. They destroy our sense of family, and they destroy our sense of community. Back to your second question, when did borders and police start to sort of fuse as one person? Very easy. They both wear badges and carry weapons. So that's, I don't care if you're if you're a soldier or if you're in anything, if you're carrying a gun and a badge, I know that the only law you are enforcing is white supremacy. And so that became sort of a no-brainer. But I do want to also say before I pass it, is that I am not 100% confident in saying I am an abolitionist. Don't read me the Riot Act yet. What I'm trying to say is that I'm on a journey. I'm on a path, right? I believe in abolitionist values. It is the best alternative for me to see the world, right? But I don't have it all figured out. I don't know all the answers. There are times, as Bamby said, right? There are points of our community and even in my own family, right? That have a hard time making that switch. And a good example of my family is the border. I come from Africa, right? Where essentially the establishment of these borders were European, but then the fight to get the Europeans off, right? The fight to reinforce those borders were actually liberation movements, were actually Marxist movements, right? Like the Eritrean movement was a Marxist movement to establish a border, right? And I do think that things get a little hard when there's bloodshed, right? People have lost their lives, people have lost generations. 3 decades of war to establish a border. It is not going to be very easy for me to be like, abolish that border. What helps, I think, is history of white supremacy and understanding that the weapons and that border came, and also understanding facts has been very, very helpful. And those are all the things that has allowed me, one, to become an abolitionist, on my way to becoming an abolitionist, and two, understanding that borders and prisons and the police enforce one law, white supremacy.
And I think you touched on what I want to get into next. I want to talk about rhetoric next. We talk, and Bamby mentioned it too, you know, talking to other people about our ideas, about, you know, like I was talking to my family the other day, and, you know, I'm half Puerto Rican, and my Puerto Rican family was like really skeptical about abolishing borders and stuff like that. So I want to, I'll give Abe the chance to talk about this, and then we'll move on to the other panelists. But like, firstly, what should we, you know, defund the police has been getting, you know, dissed by liberals lately, and you're saying we shouldn't be saying slogans like that. So, you know, what kind of rhetoric should we be using to talk to other people, to convince them of our ideas, basically? And what our enemies also use propaganda to, you know, demonize our ideas. What kind of rhetoric should we be looking out from them? What should people be looking out for? What kind of, you know, bullshit terms do our enemies use to demonize our movements, our people? Yeah, talk about that, Abe.
It's a great question. I'm gonna do my best, and I'll keep it short. I do want to hear, right? Yeah. I think it's storytelling, right? And at the end of it, it's also being able to share our fears, right? And I think when we're looking at it, and that's why the right-wing propaganda does it so well, right? It's the myth of Black criminality. Oh my God, if there's no police, white women are gonna be raped in the suburbs, right? Which is what I won't even bring up his name. But anyways, right? It's a fear. And that fear also goes into my community and my family. When I tell my family, hey, I really don't think that prisons should really be around, right? And I could, one, call them idiots and just sort of say, you'll never understand. Or two, figure out why they are afraid, right? I have my fears because I fear that if we're not abolitionists, we're all gonna either be guards or prisoners. They don't share that fear with me, right? They have their fear of saying, well, there's gonna be drug dealers, we're gonna go back to the 80s, we're gonna go back to the 90s, right? Which, with gentrification, I'm not too mad about it, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that there needs to be a real conversation, right? that we're meeting our communities where they're at. Because I think when we do that, the message is already there. The rhetoric in our communities is already there. And a great example is the Floyd uprising, right? Which started out as being fuck 12. But then everyone got into a conversation, a liberal debate, and it went to defund the police. I'm still with the first messaging. I'm still 100% with that rhetoric, right? And then if we try to assuage or convince racist white people not to fear us, right, we're gonna lose. And so I would say is, let's not be afraid to allow the hood to be able to assert messaging and rhetoric and our own propaganda.
Yeah, Bamby, I want to hear from you. You know, people are really skeptical about things like, you know, letting all 11 million people stay in the damn country, for example, and not get deported. What kind of things should we be looking out for that our enemies talk about in the ways that they demonize our movements? And how should we talk to people who we should be convincing, fellow Latinos? Like, what kind of rhetoric should we be using?
I will answer your question, but I guess the short answer, you know, is that we shouldn't be using rhetoric, right? We should be truthful to our peoples, right? And so, but I want to go back a little bit to what Abraham was talking about, right? Like about finding our own paths in this movement, right, of liberation, right? And which is ultimately what I believe, right? But I think also what has happened in this sort of like this notion, right? Like you either are an abolitionist or you're not, right? And so I think that has brought conflict to the mission, right? Of that I think all of us sort of like want to get to, right? And but also at the same time, we have to understand that many of our peoples are also caged, right? And so we shouldn't forget about those individuals, right? And so how do we juggle those things, right? And we as an organization believe that the work that needs to happen in order for us to get to the liberation that we seek, we need to do the work in a multiplicity of ways, right? That, you know, yes, we should use abolitionist principles and values, right? While at the same time trying to find ways for those of individuals who are part of our communities, who are caged and will continue to be caged, to support them, right? While that happens, unfortunately, right? Because we do live in a society and there's these monsters that have been created. And so how do these monsters that have multiple heads, right? And so how do we slay those heads? And those heads are not going to be slayed in just, you know, once, right? So I want for people to really understand that, right? That we should really be understanding and mindful of the work that other people also do, right? Because their work is also valid, right? And so we want to be mindful about, you know, to be honest with you, like not criticizing some of the work that is happening, right? That is done with good intentions. But back to your, you know, to your original question, right? Like, I think that, you know, since the colonization, right? Our peoples have been brainwashed, right? You know, when we were invaded, you know, religion was imposed onto our peoples, right? And, you know, people had to be killed, you know, because they wanted to practice their traditions, and religion was one of the things that, you know, was introduced to our peoples. And if they didn't practice, then they were killed, literally. And so all of those practices have led for our peoples to be brainwashed and for our peoples to act the way that they do, right? And so I don't think we should use rhetoric. I think we should be truthful, right? And really empower and educate our peoples about the truth, and also, everyone's has their own process, right? And so understanding that just because I have these values and because I have this way of doing the work as an organization, right? Like not everybody's going to be on the same page, but I think if people are able to understand, then they'll support the work, right? So yeah, I just want to leave it at that.
Cool. Karma, go ahead.
Yeah, and sorry, my internet is terrible, so I dropped out. So just wave at me if I'm fading.
No problem.
So, far be it for me to be the professor you're talking in relation.
No, go ahead. Talk that shit. Talk that shit. Go ahead.
Brilliant thinkers here and activists here beside me. But I think, my PhD is in rhetoric, so I do think about
Word. Go in. Go in.
But I think a couple of things. One is, I think it's very hard in the non-Black Latino community in particular to get people to think about not abolition. It's not necessarily a conversation, but a really deeply entrenched anti-Blackness in our communities. And that so many of our fears and the reason why so many of us are Republicans and the reason why so many of us just kind of isolate in our own little ethnic enclaves has to do with white supremacist anti-Black fear. And so I think one thing is to really address that head on, getting to Bamby's point about being honest and forcing our communities to reconcile with this, because this is a huge thing. And there is no such thing as Black-Brown solidarity without a lot of work to make that happen. So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing I'd say is we really have to start talking to people about what safety means and get them out of the mentality of like public safety equals police. And I think that some of the best abolitionist work really kind of gets into the details of that. Like, what would it mean to actually feel safe in your neighborhood? Does it mean having police presence? Does it mean knowing you can call the police? What if there were these other options? And that conversation around safety has probably been one of the more fruitful ones. Now, that's not propaganda. That's not like what we can be putting out in hashtags, but it is the work we can be doing, over family dinners and in classrooms and those kinds of things.
Right. So I want to go really quickly into this last few, I guess I got to combine a few questions into one, and then we'll go into Q&A. Basically, when I want the viewers, I want to come away with the idea that, I want to do some shit to break down these institutions, to dismantle these institutions. I want the viewers to really want to take action after they watch this panel. So, what kind of concrete tactics should we be adopting as a movement? What kind of tactics have inspired you? I remember recently, I forgot how long ago, but there was Occupy ICE marches and occupations outside of ICE facilities. And I remember seeing videos from all across the country of people, blocking ICE vans, physically blocking people from being, put in ICE vans, and also people, letting undocumented people in their houses to hide out and stuff like that. What kind of tactics do you think our movement should adopt? What kind of tactics inspire you? What kind of tactics do you think people should go out there and do, to help our people? Karma, I'll let you go first.
So I think it really depends on the position you're coming from. So, if you're like me, a privileged academic who's light skinned, mixed race, and who, has just a ton of privilege, like my role is going to be very different because my role is going to be to support people who are most impacted and who have the analysis that I support. I think one of the risks is for people who have a lot of privilege, who want to really get involved, to sort of go gangbusters out there and actually put a lot of people at risk. And so for me, it's to utilize all the different resources I have, human resources, financial resources, intellectual resources, whatever they are, to support local movement building that is moving in the directions that intellectually I think are right. Offering what I can offer, and kind of doing the really unglamorous work of just being behind the scenes and lifting people up. And so for people who are like me with more privilege and not directly impacted, I think that's our role.
Abe, I've seen you talk about this before. What do you think? What kind of tactics should our movements be adopting? What inspires you? Go ahead.
Okay, I hope to make you proud, Ash.
Yeah,
but yeah. I mean, I think so. First of all, great question, right? And I don't really like getting asked that question. I like asking that question. So you have, you got it easier than I do right now, Ash.
Word.
But to all the participants, I mean, I don't know if there's like a chat or whatever, but let me know, because I'm curious too about what actions people are taking. But I do have certain sort of values and principles about how we do actions and how we support, right? Number one, fail safe, support Black people all the time, like in any given moment. Because even under a global pandemic, right, that the state had a curfew for Black people because we wanted to mourn our brother in the street, right? And so I saw people supporting those uprisings, supporting those riots. And when people say, oh, a CVS is burned down, say, you know what? Being able to engage with people and just 100% supporting Black women, Black trans, Black people in general, whatever body shape that we come in. Because I think it's really important that we're starting not to look at our actions as these things that are events and activities, but actually a way of connecting with each other, right? So I think at this moment, we don't need allies anymore. We're good with that, right? What we need are friends and family, right? And so friends and family will hold you in that church for sanctuary. Friends and family will always be there with you, right? For your bail, your bond refund, the COVID relief that we're doing. Friends and family will make sure that if you do get arrested at an action or event, that there's ways where they could do that. So I think it's just looking at these events, right? And just sort of say, hey, why don't we go back to values and principles? Like, if I'm gonna be out there in the street with my Black brothers and sisters and what have you, is that I wanna be open, humble, and be able to let them know that regardless of whatever happens, that you still have a friend and a person that cares about your well-being in general. So yeah, lock up the ICE vans, block the bridges, do whatever we gotta do, but do it in a way where it's like, if the community's not asking you to do that and want you to do something more mundane or something that's less sexy and glamorous, to be able to do that also.
Bamby, go ahead. What kind of tactics inspire you? What have you seen that inspires you? What should our movements be doing concretely? Something that anyone can go out and do.
I would say if I mean, I'm gonna echo obviously what it was said, but I'm gonna say, like, if you're not doing the work and if you're not supporting the work, then move out of the way, right? And if you're gonna just be saying something to be said, I would say just shut the fuck up, right? And just support the work that has been done. You know what I mean? Like, if people don't have the guts to do what needs to be done, then the least that people can do is support the work. And I think we also need to be honest with ourselves, right? And really understand this concept of social justice, right? If you really are saying that you are for social justice and are oppressing Black people and Indigenous people and trans people, then you're full of shit, right? And so I would say just stop the bullshit, be truthful to yourself, keep it real. And, if you're just going to say something to say something, then just shut the fuck up.
Word. Word. All right, Steve, can we do Q&A? Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. The first question is in Spanish, and I think my co-organizer Adriana will have to read it because I am not fluent.
Sí, cómo no. Yes, I can read it. How they have spoken, who do they have spoken with, or what activities they carry out so that these objectives reach the people affected and not affected by this problem?
I guess we kind of touched on that a little bit, but I guess what can we do to really help the directly affected people most intensely? I guess like straight up, like keeping undocumented people in our house. I guess is that what the question is asking? I don't know.
You want?
Go ahead. Anyone talk. Go ahead.
So la persona está preguntando cómo han hablado o qué actividades realizan para estos objetivos lleguen. Ay, ya me la cambiaron. Anyways, solo que prácticamente lo que hacemos, yo pienso, nosotras como organización, como una organización que es liderada por una persona trans, quien soy yo, ¿verdad? Lo que hacemos es simplemente resistir a todas las cosas que nos oprimen, ¿verdad? El hecho de que siempre han tratado de borrar nuestra existencia es algo que nosotras como comunidad, yo como persona, como una persona privilegiada que ha tenido la oportunidad de poder ir a la escuela, de que tiene un trabajo ejecutivo, por ejemplo, para mí es algo que yo debo de usar mi privilegio y nosotras como organización, asegurándonos de que sigamos reclamando nuestra existencia dentro de este mundo. Y lo hacemos de cualquier manera, no importa, porque la violencia que experimentamos, la experimentamos de todas maneras. Así que, ¿qué tenemos que perder? Tenemos que seguir luchando y aclamar y reclamar nuestra existencia en este mundo.
Let's go to the next question too, matter of fact. And we might combine those two questions. Yeah. Steve?
Sorry, yes, I had an issue with my audio. The next question comes from Stephanie Moda Thurston.
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching a class next semester to divinity school students on the topic of migration, citizenship, and practices of hospitality. One of the main aims I have is for students to grasp that borders are violent colonial constructs and they are not a necessity. In many ways, this aim is a part of beginning to imagine a different world in an abolitionist vein. Are there any resources, such as films or podcasts or texts, that you would recommend?
Okay.
Thank you to each of you for your time and for sharing your experience with us today.
Word. Thank you to the question. And I might want to, this is also, I guess, can be tied up with one of my questions I didn't get to ask. Basically, I want the panelists to, in addition to giving some resources that people can go to learn more about this stuff, plug yourselves as well. How can people plug in to help you all do what you do as well? So I guess let's start with Abe first.
Yeah, as far as resources go, I think people are popping it in the chat, but I wanted to just reiterate how important the study of colonialism really is, right? And it wasn't just the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't just slavery. It wasn't just them going into indigenous communities and giving out diseases, right? It was essentially a thought and an idea, right, that was put into Black and brown bodies' minds and hearts, in which made us feel inferior. The idea of even the term citizenship, right? That idea and the state came from 100% Europe and the Treaty of Westphalia or whatever have you. These idea of what a citizenship is, right, were not made for Black and Brown and Indigenous communities here in the US, which is like an example is the Citizenship Act of 1792, right, which basically said Black people and Indigenous people are not citizens. That even citizenship and the idea of borders are essentially lines of white supremacy that are also in our minds, right? And that the colonial construct, right? You're looking at it, right? Bamby is a part of it. Ash, you're a part of it, right? Is that we were essentially created, right? The border was created, the citizenship was created, and the slave was created also, right? And we are moving forward trying to break that. Every border in Africa was made by a white man. Every border, right? And so when someone says they're Moroccan, Nigerian, or even Ghanaian, right, is a border construct the white man made, and now we are using it to call ourselves that. It's gonna take a lot of work, but the history of colonialism, right, is very, very important in us to learn what we're gonna have after abolition, what we're gonna have after the revolution, because Africa is a great example. When we kicked out the Europeans, we took up self-determination, and that manifested itself in a border, right? So what are we gonna use now moving forward to manifest our liberation ideas, right, as people? So colonialism, just pour them with resources, because it's so important.
And plug yourself. How can people also get involved with you?
Oh yeah. I'm actually like, well, I'm standing in for somebody else named Sian Gurmu. She is our legal attorney at the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I am the deputy director. You can follow us at baji.org. Follow us on Twitter at Baji Tweet, Instagram. We might even get a Tinder profile the way things are going.
Okay. Shout out to Baji.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Karma, go ahead. What are some resources that people can go to learn that, you know, borders are colonial, violent institutions, and also plug yourself? How can people get involved and help you do what you do?
Yeah, so I threw a couple of resources up in the chat in response to the question. There's a lot of really good stuff, I think right now that helps to make some of these questions more transparent to a wide audience. So one of the books I suggested is by Naomi Paik. It's called Bans, Walls, Raids, Sanctuary. And it's kind of a little bit of a history of immigration that's trying to put a lot of things in conversation from an abolitionist perspective. And it's not directly doing the work that Abe's talking about, historicizing colonialism, but I think it's a really accessible resource that could be, you know, really well done. Yeah, I'm the chair of an academic department, so please just make asks to me to help you rather than support anything we're doing here. But I'll pass it on to Bamby.
Word, Bamby, go ahead and make sure to plug yourself, Bamby.
So I guess anyways, people can learn about the work that we do, the work that we've done, the historic things that we're doing, right? Like passing you know, Assembly Bill 2218, which is the Transgender Wellness and Equity Fund, right? Which is a piece of legislation that was, for the first time in the history of the state of California, introduced by trans and gender nonconforming people. And also is the first piece of legislation that it's that has actually created a pot or a fund, right? Of money for resources to support trans lives, right? So I would say, you know, go to our website, translatinacoalition.org. We have done research specifically on, you know, trans Latinx health, on workforce development. We have a policy agenda. We We have a fashion show tonight at 5 o'clock. Go to YouTube. It's our annual fundraiser. Support the work that we do. We're the only translator organization in Los Angeles that has a multiplicity of services for our community. We believe that as a community, we need to empower ourselves economically and politically, because that's how the game is played. And so we are infiltrating those spaces and, making things happen for us because nobody else is doing it for us. So I would say support trans leadership, support trans-led groups and organizations that are in your localities. But obviously, if you want to support the work the Trans Latina Coalition is doing, please donate, right? Also, follow us on social media if you want to know anything and everything that is happening. We do campaigns to, liberate our people. We do put commissary money on people who are both in immigration detention and in prison. We do a lot. We have like rapid response teams in Colorado and New Mexico supporting trans people who are getting released. Les compramos calzones and, whatever it is that people need, and so, yeah, follow us on social media, Instagram at Trans Latina Coalition, Facebook at Trans Latina Coalition, Twitter at Trans Latina _C, because of limited characters, but yeah, you can find us. If you really want to support the work that we do, you can find any of us, like very simply, you just got to Google, right?
Right.
Just Google what's up and, you'll find us. But also, I'm going to say just be truthful, right? About who you are, how you're going to support the liberation of our peoples. And if not, just once again, just more out of the way because other people are doing it,
Right. Do we have time for one last question? I guess 5 minutes. I don't know.
Yeah, there's one more question to be asked, so it's good timing.
Sure.
Can you say more about how Indigenous liberation can inform abolition and vice versa?
Okay. Abe, go ahead. Go for it.
Okay. I mean, it's a hard question. I wish, I think I'm curious to hear what Bamby and Karma really have to say. I mean, I think from like East Africa perspective or Eritrean or perspective, I mean, I think the things about the Indigenous community that I really look forward to is understanding that they provide me actually an alternative way of thinking, right? And so once I have that alternative way of thinking, I have a vision of a different world, right? And that alternative way of thinking has been less poisoned by colonialism, right? There's alternative ways of thinking about gender, right? Where in certain communities where I come from, there's 6 genders before the white man came, right? There are ways of thinking about the land, right? And how regenerative it is. There are ways of thinking about the people, right? And it's not just on some I remember growing up, they made these ideas feel archaic, right? But they are not. These Indigenous ways of thinking, right, helps me love myself a lot better. And if I'm liberated, then I will be able to be a part of a team in which we're trying to liberate ourselves. So I think that the Indigenous essentially way of being, right, is more in tune with us being more sustainable and us loving ourselves and our communities more.
Right. All right. Karma, and then we'll give Bamby the last word.
So one thing I'll just say, I think that speaking to something that Abe was saying earlier about kind of the journey to abolition, because borders mean something different. And I think we get that when we center Indigenous perspectives in this conversation too, because things like citizenship, right? And things like sovereignty, which we can critique when they emerge from a white supremacist place. So US nation state or other nation states made by white men, borders made by white men. But on the other hand, when we start to think about the importance of borders and sovereignty and citizenship for indigenous nations in North America, for example, that complicates our critique of some of these things. And so I think when we put indigenous perspectives toward the center, it helps us to really sharpen what our critique is, and so that we can have clarity when we do our work.
So, and Bamby, go ahead. Tell us, like, how can indigenous liberation inform the movement for abolition?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we all need to understand is that, you know, indigenous liberation is all of our liberation, right? And so we need to really, I want to be nice to what I'm going to say, right?
No, go ahead, go in,
really,
please. I've been waiting for y'all to go in.
We need to say what we mean and mean what we say, right? I mean, there's so many atrocities happening to indigenous peoples, right? You know, that, and we just see that on TV, we just see that, you know, on the news or whatever, but we don't participate in supporting the liberation of our peoples, right? And so, you know, we need to question ourselves truly, right? About, like, do we really mean that? Or we just, you know, again, you know, like I said earlier, right? Like, just saying to say something, don't fucking do that. You know what I mean? Like, we're tired of the bullshit. You know, if you're not going to participate into getting us to the finish line, meaning the liberation that we're seeking, then stay, you know, move to the side, you know, or support in whatever way possible, you know what I mean? But don't just say shit to say, you know what I mean? Like, just mean what you say and say what you mean, you know what I mean? Don't bullshit us anymore, you know what I mean? Like, we have been bullshit for centuries. Stop the bullshit, you know what I mean? And just do the damn thing.
Word. All right.